Hello, this is Jennifer Valentine Miller presenting another episode for A Month for Emotions. And this is the radio production that focuses on the way that we think about a topic or act around an ongoing issue. And the question for my talk show today is, how does the Bible help us as we think about our own attitudes towards the gay community? Now, if you need to contact me, you can do so by either searching jennifer.valentine-miller at PRZFM 109.2 or visit me at www.healingrelationstv.co.uk, where you can find my social media handles. You'll also hear how Dr. Ravi Zacharias has been in conflict for many years with the gay community when answering questions leading to moral assessments. And the debate he has is, who has the divine right, apart from the Word of God, to say what is right and what is wrong? Now, when we talk about either homosexuality or lesbianism, we're referring to same-sex attraction, and that was made legal in the UK in 1967. Therefore, the act was no longer a criminal one that carried the death penalty for those caught practicing privately. Now, if we fast forward, the UK has now created the Reformation of Marriage Act 2013 in favour of same-sex marriages. And now there is the transgender legislation, where many are in the midst of gender equality in the workplace. Homosexuality is mentioned only 2 or 3 times in the Old Testament. According to the Gospels, Jesus does not even talk about sex between men or women. The silence is probably a result of the common and widespread rejection of relations between people of the same sex in Israel and the Church. The community of God's people, in both the Old and New Testament, appears to have assumed that everyone would recognize that homosexual practices are not allowed by God. The Old Testament law refers to a man having sex with another man as a hateful sin, and that's in Leviticus 18:22. And this view of things seems to have been taken for granted throughout the Bible. This does not mean that we receive no help from the Bible on the question of homosexuality. Questions about homosexuality must always be understood under the larger category of human sexuality as treated in the scriptures. Like sexual practices of all kinds, sexual relations between 2 people of the same sex do not exist as a separate category for discussion. Instead, it can be understood as one part of a larger discussion about sexuality and marriage, and about faithfulness as God's people. According to Genesis 1:2, it is together, as man and woman, and husband and wife, that people best live, and as God created them. Together, as male and female, they reflect the image of God and are able to fulfill God's instructions to them. And that is Genesis 1:27-28. In marriage, a man and woman are united and become one body. In the same way, when Jesus speaks of marriage and divorce, he assumes that uniting of a man and woman in marriage, for example, that's in Mark 10:6-9, the Bible undoubtedly affirms sexual relations between a woman and a man who are married to each other. And Genesis 2:24 highlights that as well. St. Paul rejects homosexuality as one of the sins that results from rebellion of the human race against God. But he also describes as people who disobey God, like those who are greedy, who get drunk, rob others, and so on, as just as equally against the moral principles of the Bible. In fact, in Romans 1, he talks about selfish people, people who gossip, and children who disobey their parents as sinners, in just the same way that women who have sex with other women or men who have sex with men are sinners. This is a reminder that God wants us all to be faithful to Him in every part of our lives, and that no kind of sin is worse than any other in God's eyes. This is also a reminder that God's love and offer of forgiveness are not held back from those who desire and experience sex relations with others of the same sex. Like the rest of us, homosexuals are people amongst God is at work, so that we might all be members of God's family. The Bible story about the city of Sodom and Gomorrah is a terribly sad story that reminds us just how much God hates sin. During the time of Abraham, 3 angels came to visit him, and 2 of the angels decided to go to visit Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord told Abraham that he was going to destroy the city because of the people's sin. God also told Abraham that he would spare the people and not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah if he was able to find even 10 people who were righteous. When the 2 angels arrived in Sodom and Gomorrah, a man named Lot invited them to stay at his home. Some men from the city came to Lot's home, demanding to be given 2 visitors so that they could have sex with them. Lot, trying to defend and protect the angels, offered the men his virgin daughters in their place. As the angry men tried to break into Lot's home, the angels struck the men blind and led Lot and his family out of the city. As Lot's family fled Sodom and Gomorrah, God rained down burning sulfur onto the city. All man, animals and vegetation were destroyed. The angels warned Lot and his family not to look back, but his wife did not listen and was immediately turned into a pillar of salt when she looked back. This is a month for emotions with me, Jennifer Valentine Miller, the talk show that discusses some of our ongoing topics and issues in a way that gets us to think and act differently in a way that's probably not according to Bible principles. And the question for today is, how does the Bible help us to think about our own attitudes towards the gay community? And later on you'll also hear from Dr. Ravi Zacharias, who's been in conflict for many years with the gay community when answering questions leading to moral assessments. And the question that always brings about a debate is, who has the divine right outside of the Word of God to say what is right and what is wrong? Now, I've been studying the humanrights.org page, and they say that some transgender people who wish to discuss this truth about themselves to others have reached a breaking point in their lives where they find it's too difficult for them to hide any longer. Transgender people often feel compelled to share who they are in order to build stronger and more authentic relationships with those closest to them. This is particularly true at school and at work, where we constantly spend a majority of our working lives with certain other people. While there are benefits, there can also be serious risks and consequences involved. The decision is theirs and theirs alone, and it's important for them to weigh both risks and rewards before making a choice to tell others about their transgenderism, of course. Remember, there is no right or wrong way to disclose being transgender or to live openly. It may not mean you have to be out at all times or in all places. You, as they, have the right and the responsibility to decide how, where, and even when, or whether or not you should share your identity with others, based on what's right for you. It's important that an inventory of risks involved in the workplace is laid out. Coming out at work has the potential to affect one's livelihood, since there is no law per se that protects one from being fired because of their gender identity, though most major organisations are now making sure they come under the Stonewall umbrella. However, when we talk about states and cities, we're probably talking about the USA, where laws are prohibit discrimination based on gender and identity and expression. Additionally, a number of other states interpret their existing non-discrimination laws to protect transgender people. It's important to know the law in everyone's city before coming out of work. Additionally, more corporations and businesses in the private sector are beginning to cover gender identity and expression in their non-discrimination policies. A growing number of private sector employers include gender identity in their non-discrimination policies as well. Most employers wouldn't normally create a hostile work environment for their employees in whom they have invested time and training. So therefore, if you are transgender, you may wish to discuss your personal situation with a trusted manager, supervisor, or HR professional before coming out with co-workers. There is no correct way to approach disclosing your identity to a potential employee, and more importantly, you should not have to. If you're applying for jobs, use your best judgment and do not research to see whether the employee has protections against gender identity or expression of discrimination. Look on the internet, use their connections to find someone who works at the organisation or connect with the organisation's LGBT employee group if there is one. And that is just a brief outline from the Human Rights Campaign, giving advice to those who have decided to come out as a transgender person in the workplace. I know there's a lot of debate in sport and whether or not it is fair that this practice should take place. However, there are rights and there is protection in the workplace for our transgender colleagues.
This is a question from the Stowe campus, and it says, how do you respond to non-believers who accuse Christians of being hateful to people who support lifestyles that are not according to the precepts of our faith?
I think this is a very important question, and they all are really. I'd be a dishonest person if I said to you that that question doesn't worry me, that I don't even think about it. In fact, we as a team, our entire team, people like Nabil Qureshi, Michael Ramsden, Oz Guinness, Amy Ori Ewing, our entire speakers team have often sat around a table and said, how do we deal with this very trying social issue of our time? And even though the word is not used here, the idea is, the homosexual lifestyle and all that has come about in our time, how do we as Christians deal with it? So Joe, if you don't mind, I'd like to take an extended answer on this. Let me give you about 3 panels of an answer. The first panel is the logical problem. The second panel is what I call the theological problem. And the third panel is what I would call the relational problem, how you communicate it. So let me take, first of all, the sociological issue here. What is the problem now? We talk about tolerance. So when I was at one of the prestigious universities, somebody went to the microphone and asked this question. And I said to the person, I will be glad to answer your question if you will first answer mine. What kind of a culture are we living in? You have to define it for me. I said, as far as I know, there are 3 cultures in relation to absolute. The first culture is called a theonomous culture, where the law of God is supposedly so embedded into our hearts that we all emotively or otherwise think in the same categories. Once upon a time, we would talk about the natural law in those categories. Natural law. We believe these truths to be self-evident. The early framers believed in the natural law. We don't believe in natural law anymore, but we used to talk about it. And that's a theonomous culture. Theos, God, nomos, law. Sometimes the Indian culture will get close to that. It's not always the case, but they sort of, dharti ke aadmi is what they will say. We are people of the soil. And the idea of respect for parents and all of that, they consider to be self-evident, ingrained in the heart of man and so on. But we don't believe in the theonomous culture in the West. So what's the second kind of culture? The second kind of culture is a heteronymous culture. Heteros meaning another, nomos meaning law. So we have another law. What does that mean? The mainstream of the culture is dictated to by the leadership at the top. If you look at Marxism in secular terms, it is a heteronymous culture. The handful in the top will control the masses. If you look at Islam, it's a heteronymous culture. If you go to Saudi Arabia or you go to Iran, which are supposed to be truly Islamic countries, the mullahs or the sheikhs or who are the ayatollahs at the top will tell the masses when they must fast, when they can eat, what they must wear, what they must not wear, who they can be seen with, who they cannot be seen with. All of the dictates, even to the discipline of how you wash your hands and feet before you worship and so on. It's a heteronymous culture. The few at the top dictate it for the masses below. So I looked at the question and I said, are we a theonomous culture? He said, no. I said, are we a heteronymous culture? He said, no, we don't want the few to dictate it for the many. I said, so that leaves us with the third, which is an autonomous culture. Autos meaning self, nomos meaning law, which means each person dictates their own moral prerogatives in the. I said, are we an autonomous culture? He said, yes. I said, all right, now tell me this. If we are an autonomous culture, and I answer your question, are you going to give me the privilege of my autonomy too? Or as soon as you disagree with my answer, you will switch to a heteronymous mode and dictate for me what I must believe as well? That is the sociological dilemma. That is the sociological dilemma, because if A disagrees with B, it's not just that A is enforcing his or her principles upon B, but B wants to enforce his or her principles upon A. So there's a mutual autocracy being sought here, but it is never going to be consistent in a culture that is neither theonomous nor heteronymous. Autonomous cultures run into a conflict where everybody has their own autonomy. That's the sociological issue. You move beyond that, then to the theological issue. The theological issue is this way. Years ago, I was doing some open forums at Indiana University, and a press reporter I was there with Dallas Willard. We were both doing the defense of the Christian faith, and a press reporter came and said she was filming some religious actions on campus for their network and so on. Do you mind if we tape what you're going to talk about tonight? I said, no, that's all right. You're welcome. But then she startled me by saying, we'll only be there for about 5 minutes, and then we'll be packing up and leaving. I hope we won't disturb you. And I thought, the news does with a talk, takes 5 minutes of it, and then tells people that this is what was said, I thought, okay, I wasn't going to argue with it. I said, ma'am, you're welcome to leave. Just tell your crew to be very quiet, because once I get into the thick of it, I really don't like the distraction, and they'll be quiet, slipping out, I'll be okay. She stayed the whole time, stayed for the whole talk, stayed for the Q&A. And then she said, can I walk you back to where you're staying? I was staying on the campus. I said, right. And she was walking with me. It's quite dark at this time. And she says, I have a question for you. I said, is this on the record or is this an off-the-record question? She said, no, this is for me. I said, so you promised me this is just between you and me, you're not going to print these answers? She said, no. Okay. I said, all right, I just want to know. And so she said, I have a problem with Christianity, and here's my problem. Christians are generally against racism, but when it comes to the homosexual, they discriminate against the homosexual. How do you explain that? I said, I find your comments so interesting. In the first part of the question, it's an ism you're talking about. In the second part of the question, you particularize it with an individual. So I'm just fascinated by that, but that's okay. I said, here's what I want to say to you. The reason we believe that discrimination ethnically is wrong is because the race and ethnicity of a person is sacred. You do not violate a person's ethnicity and race. It is a sacred gift. And the reason we believe in an absoluteness to sexuality is because we believe sexuality is sacred as well. And that's why we make our choice that same way. I said, you will help me if you will tell me why you treat race as sacred and desacralize sexuality. She was very quiet. She said, I've never thought of it in those terms. Here's what I want to say to you. Marriage, as God has given it to us, and if you take the whole corpus of the worldview, is the most sacred relationship into which you will enter. Because love is given one word in English, but there are 4 words in the Greek. Agape, eros, storge, and agape, phileo, storge, and eros. Agape is God's love. Phileo is friendship love or brotherly love. Storge is protective love or parental love. Eros is romantic love. I said, do you realize marriage is the only one that pulls these 4 together? Agape, phileo, storge, and eros. I said, and if you take agape out of that, eros is gone for whatever you want to do. Romantic love becomes redefined. And to us, the Bible gives the sacredness of marriage as Christ is to the church, the bridegroom and the bride. And in that sacredness and the beauty of a consummate relationship between a man and a woman, as it is shown in the singular commitment of the marital vow, I do and I will. When you say I do to the one, you say I don't to all of the others. And you say I will to one, you're saying I won't to all of the others. So any departure from that beauty and sacredness of the 4 confluences of love is a biblical notion of what it really means to be married. And to just take one behavior and make it look like it's aberrant is not right. All departures from that are not acceptable in the sight of God. The theological position is a consummate relationship between a man and a woman in the procreative act and in the sacredness and paying each other the ultimate compliment of taking each other at their word. So theologically, this is the way we see it. Sociologically, we've been put into a conundrum. So we come then in relationally, how do we deal with it? And here's the hard part. But you know what? And my wife will tell you this, others will tell you this who know me. I accept people with a love and a genuineness, regardless of what their view is on anything, if it's different to mine. I have learned to love humanity. I can put my arm around a person who has a different view on marriage or a different view on politics or whatever, and just say, God gives you the most sacred gift of the prerogative of choice. But God does not give you the privilege of determining a different outcome to what the choice will entail. The consequences are bound to the choice. And you go right back to the book of Genesis, and it tells you You do what is right, will you not be accepted. But if you don't, sin stalks at the door, desires to have you. And so when I look at the sacredness of marriage, any change from it, from the biblical point of view, is a departure from the biblical mandate. But at the same time, the Bible commands us to love even those with whom we disagree. And our responsibility as the church is never to hate the individual. Our privilege is to love. And only God can change the heart of a person, and God is the ultimate judge. And in a pluralistic society, let us as Christians be both light and salt and learn to love one another, and let God be the judge over all of us. He is the one who is pure in his judgments. We can make errors. Those are the three panels I want to leave with you.
You're listening to the Jennifer Valentine Miller Show, containing a selection of my chosen media items. If you would like to interact, please visit me at www.healingrelationstv.co.uk, where you'll find my social media platforms. Or send me an email at contact@healingrelationstv.co.uk.